You mentioned, we talked about this article from Seeking Alpha where the guy says, hey, you should sell your AMC stocks. And then finally at the bottom he says, by the way, I'm short, which means he's screwed and needs you to sell. And you said it was sophisticated information warfare.
Yes.
Are you familiar with fourth and fifth generational warfare?
Yes.
So a big component being information manipulation. You mentioned the art of war.
Yes.
That it's you want to finish the war before you get to kinetic. You do manipulation economics, and so I'm just reigniting those components as I point to the book you have in front of you, The Fourth Turning.
Yeah.
And we talked about this with, I think it was Ben Stewart, right?
Yes.
The Fourth Turning, which is I believe it's Strauss-Howe generational theory, which essentially is predicting that we are entering a period of strife, the winter season, which could mean a very serious...
we're in it. We're in the crisis, yeah.
So the crisis period.
Beginning of the crisis period. We're past the unraveling.
So I'll just give people a quick introduction, then we'll jump into it. 80 years ago, what did we have?
What do you mean after World War II and the
World War II?
Yeah, World War II. Yes.
The crisis.
Yes.
80 years before World War II.
The Civil War.
80 years before the Civil
War.
The
American Revolution.
That's right. So because of that, people are saying, "Hey, 3 for 3, right? What's the next big conflict?" So I wonder, is it this internal conflict in the United States between the establishment powers, which does absolutely extend to international interests for sure, but you've got the culture war here, and then you also have the conflict with China, which is on the horizon. Taiwan, they just flew 28 warplanes, the most ever, into the Taiwanese defense zone in the air, and what's it going to be? Is it neither?
Can they see that on the camera? Yeah. You should get.
And raise it up a little bit.
And I recommend everybody read this book, right? Just for, and it's very dense. This is not a beach read, okay? This is a very dense book, but it is worth struggling with and working yourself through it. It's a real thing to read books a day and not just stuff online. So get that Strauss and Howe. And it's very, as soon as I heard about it and got it, and it's been very helpful for me as a framework. It's not perfect like any theory is, but it talks about different generations, and every generation kind of raises the other differently. But if you look back in American history, from the Revolution to the Civil War to the Great Depression, World War II to today, it has a certain pattern to it. And one of the things that people, particularly in the news business, those people I see that are always ahead of the curve, understand pattern recognition. And these guys clearly saw it. I think we're hurtling towards a couple of crises. One is obviously a global financial crisis that I think could make everything else before us look like child's play. The other, there's a massive geopolitical crisis. Remember, you go back to classic geopolitics, Mackinder, right now on the Eurasian landmass, which American foreign policy since 1914 is to make sure that no power or combinations of power control the Eurasian landmass, because the world island, which the Western Hemisphere is kind of an island off of the world island. The world island, the pivot of that, Central Asia and those spots control the world. Now you have China with its partners Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, right? And we kind of forced Russia over that. We had every opportunity to break it off. They are now working almost in concert, right? Almost with one belt, one road. Also, but everything is focused around getting off the U.S. dollar. Getting off the U.S. dollar as the prime reserve currency, and the SWIFT system as the system that ties it together. They're looking to work in concert, and their controlling the Eurasian landmass will lead us to a kinetic war in the South China Sea or on the border of India or somewhere along those fissure points, unless we are wise enough and smart enough to start acting like a great power along with our allies. And as long as we continue to act like children, and our leadership act like children, and to allow the Chinese Communist Party and the party at Davos to infiltrate every aspect of capital markets, Wall Street, our global corporations, all of it, information warfare and economic warfare, who have every ability to take this thing down and to do it in 90 days. Yet the elites in our country refuse to do it, and it's the little guy. This is just like in every other war. It's the little guy that's going to go over there. It's the little guy's kids are going to go over there. They're the ones going to be buried in foreign battlefields. Their taxes are the ones that are going to pay for it. They're going to have the financial strife. And that's why it's time for populist left and populist right that are populist and nationalist, to me, to transcend politics, see where we agree, put this together, realign the politics in this country, and we can control the country for 100 years.
So I'm curious because we had the American Revolution, which was an international conflict, essentially. Then we had a civil war. Civil War was an internal conflict. Then we had another external conflict.
I don't totally agree with that.
You don't think so?
No, it was also part of remember, Lincoln and these guys were also nationalists. Obviously, slavery drove it, but slavery drove it. Let's leave the moral issues aside, which were horrific. It was also the thing of economics and the exploitation of African Americans for free labor, right? And Lincoln and these guys were nationalists. They were hardcore nationalists. Remember, Lincoln in his term built the Transcontinental Railroad, right? Passed the Homestead Act, which allowed free land, and set up the land-grant universities, which allowed the common man's kids to actually go and get an agriculture and technical thing. So these guys were nationalists. They had a nationalist perspective, and the Southern plantation aristocracy were part of a globalized system with the United Kingdom that they're even thinking of going to Brazil and South America and start a slave empire down there that would be part of a global empire. Basically, essentially tied back to the British if they could get around the thing of, hey, we're going to have slaves drive this, just like the slaves in China. Remember, the slave labor of China drives the entire system today. We still have slavery. Right. The slavery in China drives the system today.
But what I mean to say is the fighting was internal. The fighting was here.
Yes.
Then we had another international conflict overseas. So I wonder if in this fourth turning, are we going to be experiencing an internal conflict? Look, we had the Boston Globe reported that John Podesta said if Biden doesn't win, the West Coast should secede from the Union. 48 states were involved in this lawsuit that got thrown out eventually. And so I'll put it this way. We see the stuff with China. Russia, obviously, South China Sea is big. We just had Russian war games off the coast of 300 miles west of Hawaii, freaked everybody out. You've got President Biden, which many people are concerned he's not up to actually defending Taiwan or being commander-in-chief at a time of serious war.
Silicon Valley West. With the chips. We don't have a choice.
Right, exactly.
Forget the moral thing. You don't defend. You think you got to slow down and get in your F-100 truck right now or your refrigerator because of chip shortage? Let the CCP take over Taiwan.
So you mentioned the people who have been successful have been good at pattern recognition. And so a lot of my success came from my ability to be at the right place at the right time during the Occupy era, during the Vice, when I worked for Vice. I would be like, here's the place we need to be. I'd fly there and then boom, news would explode and I'd happen to be there, be able to film it. And that's why I got accused of being a Fed half the time because they were like, how does Tim know to be in these places for these big stories? It's like, no, I just recognized all the news that was bubbling up and I went and checked it out. For the past several years, I've been, I would say, bullish on some kind of civil war, be it the culture war culminating to a very serious economic crisis. It's been called a cold civil war or even a hot crisis between political factions. I think a lot of people, like Bill Maher, for instance, he said you couldn't have this because the Mason-Dixon line would go through, Grandma's kitchen. But that's because he has no understanding of civil wars internationally. He's fixed on this American idea where states fought states and not, say, Spain, where you had regions that just diverted into, were dominated by certain ideologies. So I've had a lot of people tell me I'm wrong every step of the way, from the start of the street battles, from even Occupy Wall Street that I experienced, into the battle for Berkeley, where you had Antifa, Proud Boys. And it got particularly bad where we're still seeing some of these battles. I don't know if it'll escalate beyond that. But the culture war, the ideological rift, the wokeness, the anti-woke is at the highest point of government. It's in the military, it's in the federal government, it's in the presidency, it's in the opposition to the presidency, it's in Congress. You've got woke policies, trainings happening in federal government. And then I still have people say to me, Tim, you're wrong. There will not be a civil war. Could never happen here. And now we're at the point where they're still saying it. And then I mentioned January 6th. Like if these people on the left say Tim's crazy for thinking this, now I just respond with, on January 6th, a bunch of right-wing people stormed into the Capitol. A lot of them bumbled in, mind you. The cops opened the doors. But what would you say about that? And then they go quiet. I bring all this up just to see what your thoughts are on the potential for civil war, if that's going to be our fourth turning, or if it's going to be an international conflict.
I think it's a combination of both. And look, on the Civil War aspect, it doesn't need to get violent. I think we're in if you go back and study history, we're in a nastier, more vitriolic time than before the Civil War. Go back and study the 1850s.
How long until someone gets caned in Congress?
Well, okay,
that's freaky, right?
This is my point, and that was a pretty violent time, right? A pretty violent time, and the passions ran very hot. You're in that aspect today. But we do not need to devolve it. In fact, to me, the sucker's play is to try to get violent. This is what I was always against. You don't need the Insurrection Act. We're winning. We're winning. The people in this country are now awakening to the fact of what the economic reality is and how they've been, particularly Republicans. Remember, all these woke corporations and the social media corporations that are shutting down Republicans across the board. The last 30 or 40 years of Republican orthodoxy has been give them deregulation and give them tax cuts. The reason I fought the tax cuts, President Trump and his tax cuts worked out very well, but certain aspects of it, I wanted to tax the wealthy. I wanted to increase the tax rate to 44%. Number one, I made the startling thing. They don't pay taxes anyway. And last week we saw, and Merrick Garland, just remember, Joe Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland says my number one priority is to get the leaks of the 25 billionaires that were put out there. And by the way, Mitch McConnell comes out and says it's my number one priority too. Merrick Garland says this. Because that story went down the memory hole. You didn't see story after story in the New York Times about that. You didn't see story after story in even the conservative media. You didn't see story and story on CNBC, right? 25 billionaires that have control of, I don't know, $500 billion in assets, at least that are reported, right? $500 billion, 25 over the last 5 years, have paid a combination less than $15 billion in taxes. That's what I said, raise the upper rate because they don't pay taxes. Now, and they can avoid eventually, which is going to be the tax on the assets, because that's going to come. Somebody's got to pay for this. If we're going to have this level of spending, you got three ways to pay for it. Either sell the bonds to Japan and China, right? You either raise taxes or you print money. There's one you could grow out of it, but we're stuck in a low growth environment because we've so overspent. So now there's $30 trillion. Obama, because of what he did to the Federal Reserve and the zero interest rate, we added $10 trillion during Obama's watch, and we've added another, I think, $8 trillion during, or $4 trillion, $2 or $3 trillion during Trump's, and now we just exploded under Biden, and it's nowhere. It's not stopped. Now they got this modern monetary theory. There's this new theory about it, but hey, that's why everybody's running to crypto. Right?
Yep.
That's why everybody's running back to gold and silver. That's why people are prepping. I brought some Financial Times, and every time you pick it up, it's the global apparatus, regulatory apparatus, has one focus in mind. How do I crush crypto? How do I make sure? How do I make sure it's not an alternative store of value like gold and silver are?
Yep.
They don't want you to have an alternative.
This is the Bank of International Settlements out of Switzerland, basically, that's running.
Well, it's also the central banks. It's the Bank of Tokyo. It's the Bank of England. It's the Federal Reserve. They're all going to regulate it. And now you can't do these just using blockchain. You can't just be private. They want to get into all the checks and balances. The CCP is shutting down all the farmers themselves to make it tougher. What they want to do is they see the ability of crypto. And look, crypto's not. I disagree with President Trump. It's not a scam. There's $2.1 trillion of dollars in the world trading every day. Right? Because you have to convert to dollars to do all there's $2.1 trillion out there, okay, every day doing transactions all over the world. I think there's now $2.2 trillion of crypto. So there are scams in it, but it's clearly an alternative and it's definitely a alternative store of value. It may not feel like that to Bitcoin holders today when you're down at 30,000, but for guys that bought it at 5, it is, and it's still an alternative when you look at these other cryptocurrencies. You got to take your trade, but the central apparatus wants to take that option away from you.
Yeah, again, if central authority messing things up.
This is not financial advice.
Yep.
I'm just saying, if an individual put a portion of their paycheck into Bitcoin every week, like it was a savings account,
yep,
they would not be upset today.
Yep.
Because I bought Bitcoin in November. Oh no! Bitcoin fell to 30,000. Oh geez! Imagine if you told someone in November when it was at $13,000 that it was going to crash to 30 and people would panic. They would laugh and be like, "Oh, buy some right now." To me, it's almost like a savings account.
Here's what everybody will do. Why does the system, when you're educated, they teach everything in these public schools, etc., even the Catholic schools, Christian schools, but particularly the public schools and in college, you never learn anything about basic finance.
Thank you.
No, you never do. They want you to be illiterate. You have to get in the world. Think of your life in your early 20s or 30s when you're on your own. Everything's about, hey, I got to pay the credit card. I got to pay rent. You're thrown into the world they want you to be financially illiterate. The power of the ape army. And what people are doing, I'm not saying buy meme stocks, and I'm not saying buy crypto. You know what you need to do? It's time now to act like an adult and say, hey, guess what? Everything they're telling me is a lie. I'm going to go find out for myself. I want to do my own research. I want to sit there and I want to find it. I want to learn about this. I have to learn. You have to become intellectually, financially independent to make your own choices.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.